Welcome to this effective communication guide and overview. Presented here, you will see a mnemonic known as a Tony Buzan mind map, which will help organize all of the information in the foregoing presentation. As you can see, the criteria for effective communication have been addressed, each on a branch of the mind map. The main branches of the mind map are understanding the audience, understanding the organization, selecting appropriate channels, and using effective technology. Overall, this guide is intended to help the presenter create effective communication experiences for group presentations among social change organizations. The first step in effective communication is understanding the audience. Audience empathy is a term that refers to the ability to project one's self into the audience as though he or she were perceiving him or herself giving the presentation. This facilitates understanding. The audience needs understanding, and they're seeking to be a part of the presentation, and they also require a set of clear expectations about the purpose and meaning of the messages presented. The perception of the presenter has a lot to do with the human skills of the presentation. Various communication channels offer differing levels of richness. Richness in person and in group presentations is best affected by using gestures, effective language, and having a personable appearance and likability for the audience. The presentation environment must be considered as a part of the presentation. You need to be asking questions about whether the presentation milieu is comfortable and whether the technology and all of the other enhancements in the area contribute to the presentation, or if there's something that you need to consider as a part of mitigating anything that may take away from the message of the presentation. Every presentation has a cultural context, and in business communication among social change organizations, it's important to know the locale of the presentation and whether the audience can be expected to be of an individual or collective conscience based on the shared values of the organization. Understanding the audience is presented in this branch of the mnemonic. As you can see, the most important factors in audience perception are the perception of the presenter, the perception of the environment, and the needs that the audience may have. I should emphasize the group identity needs that the audience may have as a part of the presentation, because this may be a reason for the participation of the audience in the presentation to begin with. The audience needs to be able to provide feedback to the presenter. There needs to be a cohesive identity among the audience, and the audience has a need to understand the presenter and the message of the communication. As you can see, the presenter has similar needs. The perception of the presenter can be influenced by the authenticity or the genuineness of the presentation, the presenter's ability to connect with the audience using human skills, the ability to be honest, especially during persuasive presentations, and the ability to use affect and to be affective enough to appear involved in the communication with the audience. In the organizational context, it's important to think about the locale of the organization. There are differences between high-context organizations and low-context organizations. Respectively, these are collective organizations and individual organizations. A good communicator always knows what to expect in terms of the kinds of standards and expectations that are created by each organization. In a high-context organization, it is more likely that the group will have expectations of group participation and group success. The ethics of the group will supersede the ethics of the individual. The groups share a purpose and a shared set of standards. Work groups working closely together also exhibit these kinds of contextual skills. although in high context groups, the context is implied and expected and is not a part of direct communication among group members. It is instead facilitated through nonverbal communication and other expectations. Between high context and low context groups, the legal expectations may differ according to the nationality of the organization that the communication is being presented in. In low context groups, individuals tend to seek recognition as a part of achievement and attribute their goals toward the recognition of achievement. We do in the West typically have standard ethics that are communicated and shared among the organizations. And we have organizational standards that extend beyond the standard ethics of the profession that are expected as a part of participation with the organization. As I had previously mentioned, communication is less implied and more direct in a low context group, and the legal expectations may differ in the context of the United States, depending on the profession of the organization being communicated with. It's important to understand these things about the organization that a person is approaching for presentation, because these expectations can change the decoding of presentations and messages that the business or organization receives. Knowing the organizational context is this branch in our mnemonic. As you can see, the breakdown, we have the set of standards that each organization employs, including their ethical, legal, personal, and organizational standards among participants in the organization. The culture plays a role, as demonstrated in the previous slide. The locale and the geography of the presentation makes a difference, and it's important to know the context of the culture of the organization that a person is working with. Within this context, the context of each organization will have among participants of the organization a shared purpose and a set of shared organizational goals that are present as a part of the organization's identity. Values are also a part of organizational identity. And the public image of the organization depends much on the shared values that are communicated in public, as well as with the consumer expectations of the organization and the feedback that comes in from the community through social media or other channels, reaching the organization in terms of what the public expects from the organization in terms of performance and in terms of values. When selecting appropriate channels, it's necessary to first adapt to the audience. Different audiences may appreciate different channels in different ways, and it's important to know whether you need to be giving an in-person presentation, presenting an email, presenting a mass email, having a teleconference, or having a face-to-face conversation with the audience. It is also important to select the channels based on the appropriate richness and tone for the purpose of the message. Each message may have a more or less appropriate richness and tone depending on whether the message is persuasive or positive or negative, and depending on whether the message is a business proposal or an informal email to a friend. It is important to use the appropriate level of content and to know which channels will support what level of content concisely to accurately convey the meaning of the intended message. And when selecting a channel, it's important to understand how formal the message is to be. It may not be as appropriate to use a social media campaign to present a formal message to a communications team that is supporting an organization, while a formal email or a memo may be a better choice. It is also important to know the scope of the message As mentioned previously, social media campaigns and mass media can reach a large number of people and facilitate feedback from those people, but only if that is appropriate for the purpose of the message. So you need to be understanding whether or not you're communicating, this is a one-to-one communication, or if the communication is happening with a larger group and in the organizational context. As the target for the kinds of presentations that this guide is designed for, the scope of the message is usually going to be a group, whether it's a town hall meeting, a roundtable discussion, a business meeting with another organization, or a larger presentation in a larger venue as well. It's important to understand that there needs to be interactivity and feedback, and that different channels have different levels of interactivity and feedback available. A social media campaign may provide more available options for the audience to provide feedback than a one-way mass media email campaign would. It's important to use effective visual and verbal choices when selecting a channel. If the message that you're trying to convey can make effective use of visual communications and can be more concise with appropriate use of language and verbal choices, then creating a communication channel that employs effective visual and verbal choices may be the best option. The mnemonic that's presented for selecting appropriate channels is here. This is the channels branch. As you can see, there are selections between in-person communications, written communications, communications which include visual and verbal elements. The factors that are cited in this mnemonic for selecting an appropriate channel have to do with deciding the appropriate richness, the needs of the audience, the purpose of the message, and the scope of the presentation. It is important to use technology effectively as a part of creating business communications. Technology should always help include the audience and not confound the message that is intended for the audience. Technology should consistently be an enhancement to the message. Helpful technology increases interactivity through social media or through teleconferencing, and can enhance understanding in groups during larger group presentations, town hall meetings, and face-to-face presentations. Visual elements in a presentation using technology should always be consistent with the message and clearly enough encoded so as not to create confounding messages that are unintended. Technology should always be selected based on the goals and scope of the message that's being conveyed. The goals for technology branch looks like this. Technology can enhance communication according to the goals of the communication. The goals of communication are on the right, and the methods of electronic communication are on the left. As you can see, electronic mail provides good organizational communication as well as person-to-person communication within work groups. Group networking can increase group IQ and work group creativity as addressed in the communication guide and overview presented as a part of this presentation. Group networking also facilitates work group connectivity. Social networking can be viewed as a conversation with the public, between the organization and the public, and can provide community feedback and give an organization the opportunity to reciprocate community feedback. Mass communication is more unidirectional. It can be best used to convey an organizational identity, the shared identity and message of an organization, and for advertisement and marketing. As mentioned previously, technology should always be an enhancement to a presentation. And that's the branch that's cited here. When presenting in groups, it may be effective to employ technology as a visual element, such as in this slideshow. Creating a group experience involves managing the identity of the organization and the group. It's important to know what shared values are present among an organization and what kinds of values connect individuals with the group identity. Intra-group conflict can exist where there are conflicting values, and Appropriate leadership styles can be selected to mitigate intragroup conflict by understanding the kind of conflict that the group is going through. It's also important to know the impact of a persuasive argument. A persuasive argument is always best given honestly, as a subversive persuasive argument may reduce the credibility of the argument, and it may also irritate the audience. It's important to increase an awareness of the values and attitudes that the group shares as a collective, and to mitigate the conflicting attitudes that the group may not necessarily share among individuals in the group. It's important to enhance examples of group prototypes, which means that if there is an ideal that demonstrates the group identity, then the person who demonstrates these ideals as a leader would be referred to as a group prototype, as an example. So effective leadership styles always prototype and enhance the example of the group identity. It's important to call for group consensus and action from the place of shared attitudes that are conveyed and enhanced during the presentation. When presenting to social change organizations, it's important and wise to understand the communal need for action and the message that's being asked for by the community and the attitudes that are shared among the audience. Presented here is the mnemonic for group experience. Trust and expectations are a part of group experience because the experience of trust is related to the fulfillment of mutually held expectations. The reciprocal interaction of fulfilling expectations builds the experience of trust. Having empathy for the audience and a set of shared goals that are clearly declared as a part of the presentation is important because it helps facilitate the fulfillment of shared expectations and trust. The shared values among the organization are necessary to understand and to enhance as a part of the presentation, as a part of the call for action, and understanding the need for action that an organization is presenting through the shared experience. Putting the communication on the map, you can see that effective communication involves all of the mnemonics that have been previously presented. Creating an overall experience of trust involves all of these elements of effective communication as they have been presented in the previous slideshow. As you can see, there is a consistent need for authenticity, for listening to feedback, and for reciprocation of shared goals. These are the themes that are consistent among organizations, which technology can help with if the goals of the utilization of technology are well understood, and the selection of channels, it can be based on understanding the needs of the organization and the needs of the communication that is being developed for the organization. This mnemonic should help put together this and the written presentation as a communication guide, as a single idea. This is designed to make this whole presentation a little bit easier to remember as a learning process, and I hope that you find it helpful. Our effective communication criteria that led to the development of this presentation is presented here. As has been stated, it is always important to have a clear set of expectations, values, and goals that facilitate trust within the organization. It's important to understand and adapt to the audience and the environment. It's important to understand the larger context of the organization and to be aware of cultural differences and cultural values that may change the interpretation of the message. Human skills, as an emphasis, are most important when reaching out to an audience as a person, especially when nonverbal communication and richness are available factors in the communication channel selected. It's important to employ technology effectively in a way that enhances collaboration and communication and does not confound the interactions within the groups that are a part of the presentation. So that wraps up this presentation about effective communication towards social change organizations. I'm Corey Hickson, and I thank you for taking the time to process this with me. And I hope that the presentation has been helpful toward your endeavors in communicating with social change organizations.